Good day. Welcome to Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com. I'm John Marino, and we are produced by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric, don't be left in the dark. Get Lipolis, High Tower, Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard, and White Plains Hospital, home of our heroes throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. We thank you at White Plains and all the frontline workers around our area for all you have done to get us through. We are joined here on our isolation therapy series by Scott Richman. Scott Richman is the New York, New Jersey Regional Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Scott, welcome back. We spoke back in the fall, have you back here a second time early in the new year. And we spoke back in the fall, and at that time, the world 4 months ago was much different than it is now today. Anti-Semitism in this country, what's the state of it 4 months later? Is it growing? Do we seem to be making strides against anti-Semitism and other forms of racism and social injustice? Or is this something we always need to be, and I think we do obviously, be vigilant against?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure. You and I had worked together in the past on WVOX, so a pleasure to come back in this sort of different form.
Great to have you and to be back with you again, Scott.
In terms of anti-Semitism, look, ADL does an audit every year of anti-Semitism. We've been doing that since 1979, so 40 years. We don't have the results yet for 2020, but we do have the results for 2019. And in 2019, we saw the highest number of incidents in the 40 years that we've been tracking incidents. And that was an increase over 2018 an increase over 2017, and really very, very disturbing. COVID has changed things a little bit. You know, we don't see the same level of anti-Semitic acts. We don't see people engaged in the sort of vandalism that we saw. We don't see the same types of acts taking place. However, we've seen people go online. Cyber hate, cyber crime even, is up tremendously during COVID. You may know that there was a terrible cyber attack on a Jewish school in Long Island in December, the North Shore Hebrew Academy High School. ADL was working with them in many ways, trying to help stem the tide of that, and also to help find those who perpetrated this.
So, Scott, we're at this point now where you talk about an increase in incidents over the last number of years. After all that's been done for decades to combat anti-Semitism, and you did discuss COVID, obviously, you did bring that up, but what's the reason for this increase? This, like, you know, the old expression, beats me. It seems like you fight cigarette smoking. We see the amount of people who smoke cigarettes go way down because of the campaign against cigarette smoking. Anti-Semitism, obviously, is something vastly different. It's about how people act and what they think, and yet we see it going up. What's the reason for this?
So, I would point to a few reasons. One reason is a sort of an increasingly polarized society where you see extremists beginning to swell their ranks. You see extremists and their rhetoric beginning to move a little bit closer to the center. When there's polarization, it means that there's hatred of one side or the other to a much greater extent, which brings the opportunity for extremists to move more into the mainstream. Mm-hmm. That's one aspect. Another aspect, I would say, is social media. Social media has been responsible for a great proliferation of hate speech, of anti-Semitism. I mean, it's not just anti-Semitism, it's really all forms of hate. And ADL has very much been at the forefront of fighting hate online. You may know that we started we've actually been pressing social media for years to remove hate from their platform, not allow it. These are companies that can make decisions about what's allowed on their platform and what's not allowed on their platform. And we actually are now part of something called the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition. So we banded together with the NAACP, Color for Change, a Latino organization called LULAC, a variety of organizations. And this summer, we asked for advertisers to pause their advertising on Facebook for 2 months, for July and August, and it was very successful. It was very successful in two regards. One, we got many companies to do it. We didn't know who would subscribe to this and who wouldn't. We ended up with 1,200 top companies: Pfizer, Starbucks, Adidas, Coca-Cola, Disney, and on and on and on. Top companies, and that sent a very powerful message to Facebook. Mm-hmm. And then in September, Facebook owns Instagram, right. And we asked celebrities to pause their Instagram accounts for a day, and this was led by our good friend Sacha Baron Cohen. So Sacha Baron Cohen stood up and said, "I'm going to do this, and please join me." And an A-list of celebrities, Kim Kardashian, Justin Bieber, on and on, decided to pause their accounts, and the result was that a collective 2 billion followers on Instagram did not have the people that they follow posting for a day. It sent a very powerful message.
Mm-hmm. So when you approach a social media company like a Facebook, a Twitter, Instagram, which is part of Facebook, how do they react when you come to them and say this needs to stop, before you even get into getting people and getting organizations and businesses behind you, which I know that's a second step after talking to people and saying, can you please stop this, after you say it in a nice way?
So the initial reaction, which we've been, pressing these companies for years to take steps to remove hate, to change their content moderation policies, is the way it would be expressed. So these social media sites have policies whereby they decide what's allowed and what's not. And we came to them, and they sometimes would express sympathy for our position, sometimes not. But we weren't able to move the needle. And I think that the straw that broke the camel's back was Holocaust denial. Mark Zuckerberg made clear that he was going to permit Holocaust denial on his site, not because he supported it in any way. He found it completely offensive.
And he's Jewish.
And he's Jewish, yes, that's correct, and from Westchester. Right. But because of free speech concerns, and he didn't want to be the one to be the arbiter of what's correct and what's not, and what's hate speech and what's not. And we said that's unacceptable. And that was what moved us in part to really the next phase. And this fall, partially in response to our Stop Hate for Profit Coalition, Facebook changed their policies. Mm-hmm. And they stated clearly they will no longer tolerate Holocaust denial on their website. And they changed their content moderation policies, and we saw the effect of this. We saw the effect of, especially around the election, of different Facebook sites being labeled as this is misinformation, or people having their access to their Facebook site cut off for a period of time, temporarily or even permanently. And we certainly saw this following the Capitol Hill riots, where former President Trump's Facebook site was, and Twitter, his access was banned for misinformation.
Now, obviously, I can appreciate where a company like Facebook would be kind of in the middle with free speech on one side, and on the other side, trying to fight racism, anti-Semitism, taking steps to stop that. And yet, these companies, as you're pointing out, they have to step up basically, hopefully from now on their own to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And they another facet of their response is that they hired a professional to focus on these issues within Facebook. So, they're making progress. ADL plays a role in helping them stick to it. It's not easy. It's not easy to create a system that is going to track this. They have millions and millions of posts, and they need to be sifting through that. And how do you create the systems that are going to track this very, very quickly and remove this from the site or remove access? Not an easy thing to do, and ADL plays a role both in calling this out, but also a constructive role in trying to help these companies. We have a Center for Technology and Society, and that center is based in Silicon Valley and works with these high-tech companies to help them remove hate.
Talk about some of the other efforts by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that you are making right now to try to take and make strides against anti-Semitism. I know it's a wide-ranging effort. It's a global effort.
Well, thank you very much for asking that question. I'll say a few things. First of all, I spoke a bit about extremists and the polarization in our society, and I don't think at this moment I need to explain to anybody how difficult the situation is with regard to extremists. We all saw that play out on Capitol Hill. But ADL has been fighting extremism not for days, weeks, months, or years, but for decades. We have a Center on Extremism, and its goal is to track extremists, to supply that information to law enforcement, to work with government, and really expose extremists to the light of day. So that is one effort, and many of your listeners may have seen Oren Siegel, who is the director of the Center on Extremism, on 60 Minutes last week, talking about these efforts. Secondly, I would talk about our educational programs. So ADL works in the schools, elementary school, middle school, and high school. We have programs like No Place for Hate and A World of Difference that are engaging in anti-bias and anti-bullying prevention. So these programs are designed to help students become sensitive to incidents of bias and ways that they can change their behavior or not move in that direction, or be sensitive to others in their community. The No Place for Hate program, for example, currently is being implemented in 260 schools in New York and New Jersey, impacting close to 200,000 students. So these programs are widespread, and these are community efforts to really grassroots efforts to combat hate and prejudice and bias and stop bullying.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you work and partner with other groups too in the fight against anti-Semitism and in the battle for social justice. It's not just ADL on its own.
Yeah, for sure. We work with many partners. I mentioned before the NAACP. I mentioned Color for Change. I mentioned LULAC, the Latino organization. But we're constantly working with many partner organizations. It takes a village. I'll say, for example, in New Jersey, last year we signed a memorandum of understanding with the NAACP to work together to harken back to the historic Black-Jewish partnership to fight racism in this country, to fight against injustice, to fight against prejudice, to fight against hate. We certainly are both the victims of it. I spoke before about the audit that tracks incidents. And, more broadly, the FBI tracks hate crimes. And those hate crimes, if you look at it, the single biggest group that is attacked more than any other is Blacks or African Americans. The single biggest faith-based group that is attacked is Jews. So unfortunately, Blacks and Jews have the distinction of being the victim of many hate crimes. And banding together to fight that is very, very important. So that memorandum of understanding is designed for us to do joint programming, to stand up together against hate.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about this unison between the Black groups and also, let me rephrase that. Now, you talked about this unison between the NAACP and other minority groups and the ADL together, and the history of African Americans and Jews going back to the early days of the civil rights movement and that position where Jews and African Americans were in, of both groups being the two most attacked in this country historically, that led in the early days of the civil rights movement to African Americans and Jews working together. In particular, a local hero, Mr. Schwerner from Pelham, whose mother taught math over in New Rochelle, one of the victims of the horrible murders of Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney down in Mississippi in 1964.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the legacy that we have from people like certainly the three that you mentioned, two of them Jewish, but also Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and his friendship, his deep respect for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the two of them working together to fight racism. That's a legacy that we live with today. There's a new movie out, maybe you've seen it, Shared Legacies, which really,
I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Which brings out this partnership. It's being shown at some Jewish film festivals, and it's being shown in some synagogues and churches. But it brings to life this partnership from the 1960s and what existed and what motivated it. And certainly there are issues today, as I mentioned, that require us to still come together and fight hate.
Mm-hmm. To me, there seemed to be a point where African American groups and Jewish groups seem to be pulling apart. And I would say to myself, why? Based on the history of what's happened to both groups in this country, now it seems like things are getting back together again, and both sides are kind of meeting together and realizing that all communities have to work together to eradicate anti-Semitism, to eradicate racism, and to eradicate hate of any and all types.
Yes, but I want to be clear. The experience of Jews in this country and the experience of African Americans or blacks are very, very different. I don't want to lump them into the same boat just because they're victims. They're both victims of hate crime or persecution. Mm-hmm. It's different. Systemic racism is an enormous problem that needs to be dealt with. That is not what's going on in the Jewish community. Jews have suffer from something different. Conspiracy theories, and traditional anti-Semitism that invokes dual loyalty, that invokes issues of money, or invokes issues of using power, being too powerful. This is the way that anti-Semitism manifests itself. Systemic racism is something different altogether and involves making sure that an entire group of people is not able to advance in society. So we certainly can band together because we both believe in helping each other and working with each other and in notions of social justice. But I don't want it to appear as if we have the same problems. That is not the case.
And yet we still have to realize that hatred of any form, of any sort, is hatred, and that has to be stamped out and eradicated.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Now, all of these efforts that have gone on with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and we're talking with Scott Richman, New York, New Jersey, Regional Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, here on Westchester Talk Radio's Isolation Therapy Series. All of these efforts that have gone on between all these different groups and more, how effective are they? Despite the numbers going up in incidents of anti-Semitism, as you've pointed out, the last number of years, does it seem like we're moving in the right direction, that we're taking some steps in the right direction, step by step?
Absolutely. I mentioned the Stop Hate for Profit Coalition and the progress on social media. It's not easy. You take people off of Facebook and Twitter, and they find other platforms.
Right, they find other ways to do it.
They find other ways to get their message out. So we saw that many people right after the election, extremists, moved to what's called Parler and other social media sites where their content moderation policies are not as strict or non-existent. You can put anything you want on there, and you're not going to be stopped from doing that. But, of course, we then saw with Parler that Amazon and Google and Apple removed them, removed the app from their app store, and Amazon removed Parler from their web services. And the result was they had no host and therefore couldn't operate. So, it's like whack-a-mole, and you're constantly trying to deal with the current situation. And that's part of ADL's work. So we're definitely making progress, but there's always something new. I actually just gave testimony at the New Jersey Assembly just a few hours ago. Why? Because there's new legislation that's been proposed. Why should there be something new under the sun when it comes to hate? But there certainly is. And this is exactly the issue you were talking about. It's about cyber hate. It's about hate online. And that new reality requires new legislation. So that's been put forth very justifiably by the Assembly, and I was there to support it. So there's certainly progress, and we've seen other states have put in place. ADL has been at the forefront of working on hate crimes legislation, but those who are at the extremes, or those who have nefarious intent, will keep finding new ways. But ADL is going to be there to keep fighting.
Does it seem like you take care of an issue in one area and then something comes at you from another side, like you're always getting hit from all sides, and you just have to be extra vigilant about this?
Always have to be extra vigilant when it comes to fighting hate. You never know exactly where it's going to come from. I mean, I will tell you, I'm relatively new in this position, and I was frankly shocked coming into this position, seeing the number of incidents that happen every day of the week. Anti-Semitic incidents. Part of ADL's work is not just calling out hate or fighting hate through legislation or pressing these companies. It's actually day-to-day work, grassroots, in terms of responding to incidents that happen every day. And I'll just put it out there for your listeners. If you are the victim of hate, anti-Semitism, or really any form of hate, feel free to log that in on our website, adl.org/incident. We look for that. That makes it to the audit, but more immediately, we will respond to that. And it could be that we're helping you navigate through social media, what the protocols are for reporting this. It could be that we're helping you understand whether or not this is anti-Semitic or not. Or it could be that we're connecting you with law enforcement, and we're connecting you with the right law enforcement. Is it your local police? Is it the state police? Is it the FBI? So ADL can play that intermediary role with you. So very, very important. But that as a result of playing that role, ADL is seeing the underbelly of what's going on in our society. And I was frankly shocked by how many anti-Semitic incidents there are just in the New York, New Jersey area. Mm-hmm. That's my region. I don't go beyond that. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there are more anti-Semitic incidents in New York, New Jersey than any other area in the country, by far.
Really?
By far.
Really? What is the reasoning, if there's anything that you can pinpoint and look at, as to why this region of the country, as inclusive as we seems to be the region where we have the most anti-Semitic incidents?
More Jews. I mean, put very simply, such a large Jewish population, mm-hmm. and to a great extent a visible Jewish population. So quite a number of the incidents happen to people who don't know the perpetrator, but they're so visibly Jewish that they stand out and end up becoming the victim of random attacks, mm-hmm. or not so random attacks.
Mm-hmm. Everything going on in this world, including what's been happening over in the Middle East at the end of the Trump administration, within the last year of the Trump administration, in the final days of the administration, the deals they were striking between Israel and Arab countries in the Middle East. And I know you've been to Israel. You have a lot of experience, an interesting background, the things you've done, and you are quite the spokesman for what's gone on in the Middle East too. what was the reason why the Trump administration was able to reach accords, the so-called Abraham Accords, with different Arab countries, where it seemed like for 80 years we were just running stuck in the mud?
So I think that certainly it was a great deal of hard work and reaching out and building those relationships. There was a quid pro quo, in each of the Arab countries where they were able to make peace, and I think that was a big piece of it. The U.S. stepping in and offering F-35 planes, very important. Also, the Israelis. So there was a lot of talk about annexation, and that was taken off the table. These kinds of deals, which I'm not saying that it's anything in terms of that, but that clearly was very important to making sure that these took place. I think that, and here I'm speaking personally because ADL hasn't really they've certainly taken a position on the Abraham Accords and are in favor of it, in favor of peace, that's for sure. But they haven't necessarily taken a position on the F-35s. Now that is something that the Biden administration is going to have to grapple with, because there's a policy in place, legislation in place in this country where Israel has a competitive advantage over their neighbors. And the question will be whether the U.S. selling F-35s to their neighbors is going to come in the way of that and not allow Israel to have its qualitative difference in terms of its neighbors. Mm-hmm. So we'll see, but hopefully these accords can continue to move along. And we also have to see what happens in Israel. We have elections coming up, although there seems to be a little bit of a wrinkle there because they're not exactly sure how to deal with absentee ballots. They haven't had to face that.
Sounds familiar.
Yes. So, in the middle of COVID, which, it's hard to say, but on the other hand, Israel is vaccinating their people at a pace that is far, far beyond what this country has done. And I think that they're going to have vaccinated a large percentage of their population by the time of the elections in mid-March.
What's the reason why Israel has been so proficient in being able to vaccinate, whereas here we seem to be, again, stuck in the mud? I hate to keep using that term, but that's the case here.
So I'm not a health professional, as I put that out there. I can only tell you what I've read. Mm-hmm. But, Israel has a very highly developed health system. And part of being so highly developed is that it's very unified. It's state-run. So you have one system. And you tap into one system, and you can make that work much more easily than in this country, where you have many, 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 many systems, and each state, each locality is dealing with the vaccines. It's also a much smaller country, so they don't need nearly as many vaccines. You're talking about 9 million people. And when you have 9 million people, it's a different story in terms of getting them vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a piece of it. And the other piece is that Israel is very used to emergencies, with a country coming together to deal with emergencies. They've had to be. They've been in a state of war since they were founded in 1948. Just about every person goes through the army and is sort of trained in that way to be responsive to these emergencies and to come together and figure out how to build systems that respond to emergencies very quickly. We don't necessarily have that. And let's face it, there were a lot of politics going on over the course of last year in this country that made it very, very difficult to move things along. Things became political.
So the fact that it's a national system in Israel seems to be the key. Whereas, and I've thought about this here too, we're doing things 50 different ways in 50 different states, plus Guam and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands too. You're talking at least 53, plus the federal government 54 different ways. And you can't get anything done like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all hearing the stories anecdotally. Oh, this person in that state got it quickly, and I can't get it here. And I heard in New York City that this is happening, but in Westchester it's like this. And that's not the way things are happening in Israel. I can also tell you in Israel, for example, they are giving out vaccines all the time. This is like maybe 24/6, let's say, not on the Sabbath, not on Shabbat, but they are giving. I anecdotally heard of somebody who got his time for the vaccine, and it was like 2:30 a.m. And wow. Yes, and that because they're giving it out round the clock, and it doesn't matter. And believe me, that person showed up at 2:30 a.m. and it was just as busy at 2:30 a.m. as it was at 2:30 p.m. This is sort of a different mentality to this. I mean, I think part of it is we don't have enough vaccines to be able to give it out at that rate. But again, a smaller country.
As we move forward now into a new administration and supposedly a new mindset here in this country at this point, what are your hopes and expectations as the fight against systemic racism, anti-Semitism, and all kinds of hatred continues? What do we need to do now, starting today, that we maybe have not done before, not thought about before?
I'll give you a framework for thinking about this that I think might be helpful. There are essentially three ways to combat this. One way, and of course ADL is involved in all three. One way is through legislation. And that's very important, and ADL does a huge amount of civil rights work across the country, in state legislatures, at the federal level. Very, very important. But those are the guardrails. It doesn't change hearts and minds. It just sort of keeps people on a certain path, and tells people, these are the boundaries, and you go beyond that and you're going to be punished in some way. You're going to be stopped. Secondly is education. Very, very important. You need to change hearts and minds. Education changes hearts and minds, unlike legislation. The only thing is, not so easy to educate a large swath of the population. Are people listening? Are they receptive? Are there different views? All of these things make it complicated to educate. We've seen now many legislatures across the country adopting Holocaust education, making that mandatory. And I think that that's an effort to talk about what can happen when hate gets out of hand as a lesson for people. It's not necessarily just the facts of the Holocaust, but it's broadened to today. So education is very important, but limited. And the third way is civil society. And I think that we as a civil society need to be more focused on how we can come together, because what we need to do as a civil society is push extremists back to the margins. I said this a little bit before, that what happens when you have a time of polarization is that people on the extremes begin to come a little bit closer to the center. It's very easy to say people on my side, my end of these polar opposites, are okay, but people over there on the other end are not okay, and you can demonize them, and you can make them somehow seem not worthy of our treating them like human beings. And we need to get to the point where extremists are pushed back to the margins. And that happens when the compact that exists between me and my neighbor, where I'm not going to engage in hate against them, and they're not going to engage in hate against me, when that begins to hold sway. And even more than that, if we hear of hate, we will say that's not acceptable. And it begins to be pushed back to the margins. So we need to come, and we've heard messages of unity, and we've heard messages of coming back to a country that is not as divisive. And I think those are the right messages. We need that because this polarization begins to tear at the fabric of society, and we've seen how it's torn at the fabric of society, and it's time to come back together.
Scott Richman from the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, New York, New Jersey Regional Director. Give us one more time all of your contact information at the ADL.
So first of all, thanks very much, John, for having me on. Always a pleasure. Always fun to talk with you. Interesting. So Scott Richman, ADL, New York, New Jersey Regional Director, and you can reach ADL at adl.org, our website, and there you can find lots of information about how you can get involved, free resources, educational resources that you can use, like how to have a conversation about tough issues like extremists or like racial justice. When the election happened, anytime there are these issues out there, you can find it there. We hope you'll report incidents on our website, adl.org/incident. And if you want to reach us, whether you want to get involved or you want to learn more, you can always do so at New York at adl.org.
Scott Richman, we thank you, and let's talk again. Matter of fact, in time for the Passover holiday, let's get back together again and talk about that, okay?
I look forward to it.
Same here, Scott. Thank you. Here on Westchester Talk Radio, which also now is the home of Dutchess Talk Radio, too. As you see the banner up there, I wanted to show that off to you here today. Putnam and Fairfield County Talk Radio. Catch all of our programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube, and we are made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric, don't be left in the dark. Get Lipolis. Hightower Westchester, managing our wealth to a fiduciary standard. White Plains Hospital, special thanks to our heroes at White Plains Hospital for all they have done throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon, Park Sterling Realty in Bronxville, and Michael Labriola Landscape Design and Construction in Armonk. Again, catch all of our Westchester, Dutchess, Putnam, and Fairfield County talk radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.